So I'm Gerri Haynes. This is Bob Haynes. And we are members of Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. And in 1992, I started organizing trips for WPSR to go into the Middle East. And one of the places that we went in January of 1993 was Gaza. And we met this wonderful man, child psychiatrist. Is this the right? Yeah. Loud? Okay. Named Sewage. And we also met with our Israeli colleagues at that time. And that trip was an incredible eye-opener for me about what the United States was paying for and how many Israelis wanted us to stop doing what we were doing and promoting what they saw as an injustice. Well, we have been back. I've been back every year. I was just telling someone 2 or 3 times a year since then. I think, well, maybe I won't go back for a while, and then I think I can't stop myself from going back. So after 2009, at the end of the attack called Cast Lead on Gaza, we decided that instead of just going back and learning and watching and talking to people, that it was time for Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility to start doing service work. Not really in our charter, because we're an NGO dedicated to education, excuse me, but it was just not ethical anymore for us to go in and look, parachute in, pick up our parachute and walk out. It didn't make sense. So I began to organize these delegations that had medical people in them, and my husband Bob, as some of you know, is a cardiologist, and he has willingly and kindly and enthusiastically most of the time also made these trips. And we've come back and reported and talked to you about some of these trips, but tonight we want to talk to you about asking you to imagine that you live as a person in Gaza, that you are on the receiving end of the direct and indirect taxes paid by the United States of America, that I as a taxpayer have deep and abiding feelings of sorrow about what I pay for and the people that I torture and make afraid and live in terror. So it's a very personal thing for me that we do this. And also, my Israeli friends say to me, tell the people in the United States to stop this, because we think this is an injustice that can only be righted when you take away this kind of support. We want this to end. And if you want to look up some really fine Israeli sites on your computer that will reinforce what I'm telling you, look up Gisha, G-I-S-H-A, and Physicians for Human Rights Israel, because these people are doing monumental work to try to overcome some of the injustices that are being perpetrated in this area. Well, so Operation the Cast Lead got us going, and we've now made 5 medical service trips since October of 2009 into Gaza, and our next trip is scheduled for next month. We'll go in, we'll leave here on the 11th of April and go in on the 14th, and we'll be there for just a week. What we have discovered in Gaza is a cohort of children who are born with ambiguous genitalia, one of 5 places on the earth where this is a commonality. And so in with us each time goes a young and wonderful pediatric urologist named Rich Grady, and Rich operates and teaches from morning till evening on these children who have surgical needs that can't yet be met. And this time he hopes to concentrate on teaching. All right, so.
So I just wanted to kind of lay out where this is. I mean, we all know kind of generally where it is, but So just in general, I mean, it's a teeny weeny tiny place, and I'm just going to point that, you know, big Saudi Arabia, big Egypt, big Iran, big Turkey, Iraq, and then you get into Jordan, which is pretty big, and then you get down to this Israel, which has been pink, and you see the West Bank, which is a sort of a tan color in the middle of that pink, and then a tiny dot on that entire thing is Gaza, and I'll point at it here, which is here. So next slide. Next slide is going to show Gaza inside. So you see in Israel, the Gaza Strip here, and I guess just two of the very similar things. This is a larger pullback. This is the Jordan River Valley. Israel and the West Bank is in here, and the Gaza Strip is down here on the Mediterranean, and this is the Gaza Strip. But I'm just going to point out just geographically that this is a low level. This is actually comes all the way up from the Rift Valley, but this geographic formation. This is the Jordan River, and this is all high ground, and then the water flows down to the Mediterranean from the high ground. Gerri's got the cursor going, and the water that flows down should flow right on out to the Mediterranean Sea through Gaza. But Israel has put in a ton of wells all through here, so the water is no longer able to flow. Plenty of water coming down, but no longer able to flow into Gaza and refill the aquifer. It's all put out in wells into Israel. And this is the whole Gaza Strip that used to have several ways to get in. Rafah, coming in from Egypt, is still open to people. And then these other places were all places that would have people coming in and out from Israel, but no longer. They're all closed. There is one place that comes in here, Karam Shalom, for trucks and material, but it's very, 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 very limited what can get in and out. And then most of us come in through Eretz, from Israel, to get into Gaza, and we stay in Gaza, the main town area, and we do a lot of work in the Jabalia camps, but in some other areas as well. So I think that's about it.
So again, we're going to ask you tonight to think that you're a refugee. You had a home in Israel in 1948, and now you are in the Gaza Strip, and your family has been there since 1948, still wishing that you could return to Israel, but knowing that that's probably not ever going to happen. But now Israel has placed Gaza under an incredibly tight siege. So you living in Gaza maybe can't get the medicine that you need, maybe can't get the food that you need, can't sell your produce anymore, can't fish in the ocean anymore. You are now in, we call an open-air prison. I have a friend who wrote to me this week and said, don't call this an open-air prison. In prison, people are well cared for. And I said, but there are so many things that are similar, because I, living in Gaza, cannot come in and out. I, living in Gaza, don't have access to the medicine that I need. When we go in, again in April, we'll take with us a drug called Plaquemil for a young woman who has systemic lupus erythematosus. And she can't get that drug in Gaza. So she, when we're not going in and not taking the drug, if she runs out, she just goes without. And then she begins to feel worse and worse and worse until we come in again and bring in the drug. Now, Laura Hart, who's an adult urologist, and I went into Gaza, not specifically on a medical mission, but to see our friend Dr. Sewage and sort of lay the groundwork for this April trip right after the operation of Pillar of Cloud, which happened in November of this last year. Operation Pillar of Cloud was aggressive, fast, killed a lot of people in a hurry, in supposed retaliation for rocket strikes. And then things were loosened up after that because there was such a strong outcry from the international community. Then that, right after we got back, there was that shooting on the East Coast, and all those little children were shot and killed. And I went quickly to my computer, sort of in the middle of the night, thinking about this, and went back upstairs and said to Bob, 24 children. In Gaza, there were 48 children killed in that 8-day period, and 510 were wounded, and I paid for that. I don't know how we come to terms with that kind of awareness that you and I, if we pay taxes, are culpable for what's going on with these people. Bob likes to say this is not a natural disaster. This is a caused problem, and it has some ways out of this if we adhere to our humanity. So there are 1.7 million people living in Gaza in 360 square kilometers. The Seattle metropolitan area is 15,209 square kilometers. Israel is 16,000 square kilometers. 2/3 of the people living in Gaza are refugees from 48 and 67. Over half are under 18 years of age, and the majority are Muslim. So I show you this picture of Seattle because I think it's significant. I just told you that the Seattle metropolitan area is over 15,000 square meters, and Gaza is 360 square meters, about 2.3% of the size of Seattle. The population of Seattle is about 4 million. The population of Gaza is 1.7 million, making it one of the most densely populated places on the earth. Imagine, if you will, that down in one little tiny corner of this map would be 2.3% of that landmass, with almost half as many people as populate this whole big territory. It's incredibly, incredibly crowded there. The air is dirty, the land is dirty, the water is dirty. I, living in Gaza, have no access to a healthy life. Even if I'm very wealthy, the water is bad, the lights go off. It's a very difficult place to live, Cliff. So, Bob showed you from the north part of Gaza, the Eretz checkpoint. When we first started going to Gaza, the Eretz checkpoint was a turnstile. That was in 1993. Now the Eretz checkpoint...
It's a long cage to get through. And
so you walk a long, long way. And 2 years ago when we went in, we were greeted with great aplomb by the people of Gaza. And now when you go in, you are thoroughly investigated by Hamas. So the people of Gaza are coming and going, having more and more trouble. Laura and I took in $4,500 worth of medicine in December. It was confiscated by Hamas. And it took us, let's see, December, January, February, March, they finally released that medicine. And okay, why are they doing that? Well, Hamas is trying to have a bureaucratic government that's similar to ours. We wouldn't let anyone just bring medicines into our country and start distributing them willy-nilly, even if they were, reputable, which we think we are. But they're telling us, don't bring medicines in here without permission. So this time when we go, we'll take electronic equipment, like a computer and a hard drive for Gaza Community Mental Health Program, and we'll take lots of school supplies, and we'll take soccer balls, and we'll take pumps for soccer balls, which are always in hot demand because the Palestinians love to play soccer. And so, they can't get that stuff very easily. So we'll take it in for them with as much money as we can gather and spend and stuff that we can pack in our suitcases. This is Rafah checkpoint down, Bob told you, between the southern part of Gaza and Egypt. And while the Rafah checkpoint is a little easier to go in and out of, it takes an application weeks ahead of time, and sometimes the application is rescinded, and then the territory south of Rafah into Egypt has become intermittently more and more dangerous for people who try to get from Rafah down to Cairo. So this is not an easy trip either. And then there's this option. There's a woman that I met in Bethlehem named Amira, and when I first met her, she said, well, I went into Gaza the first time through the tunnel. I was so jealous. I want to go in through the tunnel. And then we went to the tunnels, and they were full of gasoline and horrible smells. And then we heard the terrible stories that more than 200 people have died in the crush of the tunnels. And I became a little bit of a chicken, I'm afraid. But it still somehow appeals to my naughty child, I think, to go through that tunnel. The tunnels now are regulated by Hamas, and they're taxed by Hamas. And so it's not at what it was 15 years ago when the tunnels were much more rudimentary and people were coming and bringing, but brides come through the tunnels, camels come through the tunnels, cars come through the tunnels. Lots of things go through the tunnels, but still not very safe. Thanks, Cliff. Okay, this is Amani, the young woman. I'll tell you just a little bit about Amani because I want you to know some of these people. We've known Amani since 2009 when she helped us through the Gaza Community Mental Health Program to put our program together. She's an extremely hardworking young woman with a college degree, very bright, very lovely, emails me all the time, talks to me about what she's doing. She's not working for Gaza Community Mental Health anymore, but I love this girl. And I would pretty much do anything I could to help her, and yet it's so limited what I can do. Next to her is Wiam. Wiam is her brother. Wiam works for UNRWA. He has a responsible job. He's in his 20s, really, really sweet boy who has a seizure disorder. And when Wiam can get his seizure medicine, he looks just fine. He functions and nothing's wrong. But when his seizure disorder medicine runs out, he seizes. And then he stays home until he can get his medicine again. And it's very intermittent, and it's not reliable, and Wiam suffers, and his whole family suffers. And they're very educated, very loving, wonderful family, suffering from something that they certainly had nothing to do with. They're in prison. There's nothing they can do.
So the fellow on the right is my patient, Mohammed, and his son brought him into a clinic. I see maybe 20-some people a day, and when I'm done with some of them, I ask, may I take your photograph? And so they consented. And the picture illustrates several things. In this particular picture, stature, this is the only place that I've gone around the world that I felt tall in Gaza. I'm about 5'8", 5'9", and it just occurred to me someday that everybody else is sort of shorter than I was. And not everyone, but lots of folks. And Mohammed had come early in the visit to kind of get a second opinion. Is this what I should do? He had just had a heart catheterization, and they found that he didn't just have one bad coronary artery, but several, including his left main coronary artery. And that is not a good setup for stenting. You can't put in stents with this many problems. So he needed bypass surgery. He needed it significantly. And so we informed him, this is what you have to do. And there are 3 cities out in the West Bank who would do this for him. The doctor I was working with contacted the doctors out there, Jerusalem, Ramallah, and Hebron, all do bypass surgery. And it was all working out. He got his family together. His family is not like 5 children and 2 adults. It's like 50 people, and so they all pooled their money, and they were going to help this grand old man, Mohammed, to go out and get his bypass surgery. They came back later in the week, and everything was set to go except that Israel would not let him out. And why is that? Because he had done nothing wrong, but a nephew of his had been captured once throwing rocks at the Israelis, and it was to punish the entire family. They would not let him out. And that's kind of on a micro scale, one family, one man, and this man will die because, and probably has, I haven't heard when I've been back, but that there's a 70% 3-year mortality for this kind of disease, left main coronary artery disease. And so he'll die, and it won't be a statistic that was in violence and a war or anything. It'll just be an old man dying. But it was something that was preventable and fixable. But he's not going to make it, clearly, all because of this collective punishment. So I have my two themes about Gaza. One of them is that it's not a natural disaster. We see these terrible, terrible disasters around the world, the mudslides, the earthquakes. They're just awful things, and hundreds, thousands of people die, and we just feel awful. You know, Japan, I mean, just name it. They're terrible natural disasters, and I feel awful for them. And this is not a natural disaster. This is a man-made disaster made by and contributed to by us. That's point number one for me. And point number two is collective punishment. It's not fair, it's not right, it's against international laws and agreements, and yet, you know, these guys, they didn't do anything wrong. And the vast majority of the people we speak with didn't do anything wrong. I mean, they're just like, they're really, literally, just like we are. They're just trying to get through life and have their families and make a living, and that's being all compressed. And as Gerri sort of alluded to, these people are not just hemmed in by Israel and all the restrictions, but also now by Hamas and lots of restrictions there too. So it's a pretty difficult place to live in, and yet we see the sense of humor, resilience, the wonderful spirit that we get, and that's partly what draws me back is the beauty of the people under duress and how they are wonderful with us and wonderful with one another.
This little girl was of a family of about 6 children. I think her name is Amira. She and her sisters and brothers all have pale skin, this ruddy red hair, short stature, look 2 years younger than their stated ages. They are of the cohort of children that probably is between 10 and 12% now in Gaza suffering from chronic malnutrition. That's a huge high percentage. Now, in Iraq, we were able to see that number climb to 22%. We don't want that to happen in Gaza. And yet, we see the number creeping up because people don't have access to adequate nutrition. UNRWA is probably taking care of about 70% of the people in Gaza, but as you know, the United Nations is really falling short on cash. And so they're having to cut back on some of their programs, hopefully not yet on food for people in Gaza, and yet so many of these kids look like this. Kids that should have hair as dark as mine with this ruddy red hair, with short stature, inability to learn fully, and to ward off disease. It's a tragedy to see these beautiful little children. And she is beautiful, isn't she? But she's chronically malnourished. Some of you have heard me tell this story before because last April, one of the things that I do is go in and talk with mothers whose children have died. Here in Seattle, for the last 23 years, I've been facilitating a group for mothers whose children have died. And so when I go into Gaza, I want to meet some of these mothers. And I met last April with a woman who had put her 4 children to bed, 3 of them ages 4, 3, and 2, in a room adjacent to hers, and took the baby to bed with her to sleep with herself, to be nursed. She fell asleep just after the children had asked her to light a candle in their room because there was no electricity. Intermittent electricity is chronic in Gaza. The electricity gets shut off for a number of reasons, that the taxes that are collected don't get distributed to Ramallah, or Israel shuts down their part of the power plant, whatever reason. It's probably 8 hours on, 8 hours off would be the norm. And these children were in a period of time when the electricity was off for 12 hours or more, and they said, please light a candle for us in our room. So the woman took her baby to bed to nurse the baby and fell asleep and woke up with smoke billowing through the door of her children's room, and all 3 of them died. because the candle had burned down and tipped over and lit the room afire. That woman's family is related to a young man who now is going to school at Washington State University. So here we have coming home to us this tragedy of people who are right here in our midst, studying in our university, heartbroken because their cousins died in such a senseless and needless tragedy. Go ahead. This is like the teeny tiny tip of the iceberg of the history of this place. And if you want to know the history of this place, it's complex. It starts out, what did Rich say to me just before we came in? There are people debating where the Arabs ever came from in the first place, and he said to me, God knows. But here we are, starting with the Ottoman Empire and through the Balfour Declaration, and one by one thing happening that meant that the Arab people didn't have a state, and the Jewish people did have a state. Now, if you read your history, you'll know that the Arabs were offered a state and declined because they felt, not without reason, that land that they had was being taken away. And then in 1948, of course, there was a war, and a lot of their land was taken away, and their villages were destroyed, and people were displaced both inside Israel, outside Israel, into Jordan, into Syria, into Lebanon, and into the Gaza Strip. So the tragedy just unfolds further and further and further and gets worse and worse because the West Bank is no longer a coherent piece of land. The idea that we could have a two-state solution becomes more and more remote because there really aren't pieces of land that you could connect and call two states. It's a very difficult political problem right now. And I'm living in Gaza, and I'm tired of this. I'm an 18-year-old kid. I've never had freedom. I've never been able to walk out freely. My dad was shot. My little brother was shot. I'm angry. In some way, though I am nonviolent by nature, I understand those rockets. I understand that out of complete desperation, and because my education has been hampered, and because I'm chronically malnourished, I understand that desperate acts happen. And so the rockets are fired, and the retaliation happens, and the retaliation is brutal and overwhelming. In 2008, 2009, 1,400 people were killed in Gaza. 10 Israelis were killed, some of them by friendly fire. The level of post-traumatic stress disorder, what we no longer call PTSD, but continuous traumatic stress injury, is universal in Gaza. Everyone has been and is continuously traumatized. Go ahead. So I'm going to show you a few slides from December of 2012 after a pillar of cloud. This little boy was injured when a rocket or a missile hit his home, and his father was badly injured, and so that's his uncle holding him. They had come to the hospital to visit the daddy who was maintained in the hospital. Hundreds and hundreds of children were injured. Go ahead, Cliff. This was 8 days. 18 schools were either partially or fully destroyed. This is a United Nations school. Go ahead, Cliff. This building just sort of in a horrible way fascinated me. If you can see up at the top, there's a place where a missile made a direct hit. Can you see that? There was a Hamas official in that apartment, and the missile just right through. Imagine what that would have been like to be on the floor below. Imagine the concussive effect of such a strike. Took out that entire apartment all the way through. Go ahead. Some of you may have read about this home. There were 11 people killed in one airstrike in this home, because they were aiming for a targeted Hamas official. Now, the rumor in Gaza went like this. A Qatari official came into Gaza in the months before Operation Pillar of Cloud and brought in some millions of dollars to the Hamas government, and also brought in some gold wristwatches and some cars. all armed with GPS devices, all keyed so that Hamas officials could be identified. Now, I don't usually tell urban myths, but I heard that so often in Gaza that I began to think, oh my gosh, I wonder if that's really true. Whether it's true or not, the ability to target Hamas officials is very discreet, generally speaking. And in this place, they had a Hamas official who just before the strike came walked out the door. And babies were killed, and mothers were killed, and 11 people were killed. Go ahead. You can see in the background here, there's some pretty substantial dwellings, and there's some real money in Gaza. People who are supplied money from the Gulf states. It's a small portion of the people, but Hamas officials were targeted again. And the reason I show you this slide is you see this kid picking up wire, the debris. We know from reports that the Israelis have done what we've done, which is to use uranium-238 in their weapons. Uranium-238 is a low radioactive, highly toxic material. And when I look at this picture of this kid with a wire in his hand, I think, what's his future? We know that in Iraq, the number of people now with cancers and congenital malformations has just skyrocketed. If you look at Darjamal's recent reports from Iraq, you'll see that there are investigations underway in the places where the United States used uranium-238 at the highest level. Well, we're going to see that in Gaza. We can almost guarantee it. Go ahead, Cliff.
I just want to talk about the NoGo area, and running from left to right is a silver strip, which is the large wall. It's about 10 meters or so that separates Gaza on our side and Israel on the other side of that picture. And the wall is heavily fortified. No one would ever dare to go in and out over or under that wall. But all the point of the picture I want to point out is this no-go area, which is from the wall into Gaza, about 2 or 3 kilometers, that is arable land. You see it's green, it's growing grass or whatever, all through where that little arrow is going. And that's the wall the arrow is pointing out. And my point is that there's a lot of arable land, I mean acres, scores of acres of arable land that the people are not able to use because they're not allowed to get anywhere near that wall. And they're also the best septic drain field sewage treatment plants are in that same area, and Israel has turned them down. They're not allowed to utilize that either for crops or for this septic sewage treatment plant.
They wanted to build that sewage treatment plant up there near the wall in the southern part of Gaza, but they were denied the permit and also the materials, and so they built a sewage treatment plant out near the Mediterranean. And when the power goes out, all the sewage just drifts right down into the sand and then seeps out into the Mediterranean. It's just, ugh, it's awful. Go ahead. At the end of Pillar of Cloud in November, one of the results of the outcry from the international community was that the no-go zone was narrowed, so that people were really happy that they were going to get to go out there and tend their crops. And this young man is one of those people who went out into the no-go zone thinking that he was going to celebrate with his friends, that they could actually go out there and not be shot, and he was shot. And he was shot in a terrible wound to his groin. His surgeon described to us that they had to reconstruct 4 vessels, and they weren't sure even then that they were going to be able to save his leg. But when his little boy curled up on the bed with him, he looked pretty happy. So again, just to review, 70% of the population is food insecure, 80% rely on international aid. There are crop failures due to chlorides in the soil, crop danger due to nitrites in the soil, and that's from free or flowing sewage that's either fully or partially treated. And there's this horrible loss of access to fish protein. At the end of Pillar of Cloud in December, it was declared that what had been originally some years ago a 12-mile radius that people could go out and fish, and then narrowed to a 6 nautical mile radius, and then finally has been for the last few years a 3 nautical mile radius where they could fish, but the water was polluted and the fish were young and small. That was increased to 6 nautical miles again. So there was a great rejoicing in Gaza in December, January, when that change was made so that they were going to be able to fish in a little deeper water. And then while our president was recently in Israel, 2 rockets were fired out of Gaza, and the limit went right back to 3 nautical miles. So it's very hard for these people to follow their fishing inclination and feed their children with safe protein. There they are, beached boats. Go ahead. And this is the free-flowing sewage that goes right into the Mediterranean. And there are days when you can stand on the edge of the Mediterranean with children playing along the beach and see a brown pool semicircle right out in the water. And it's just poop. This particular stream is called Wadi Gaza, the River of Gaza, and it's dammed up on the Israeli side so that very, very little water flows through unless there's a storm. And in high water times, the Israelis open up the barriers and Wadi Gaza flows very freely and floods this whole plain and covers the whole plain with the nitrites that come in fecal material. Yeah, but the dead cow, some of you have seen the dead cow before. The dead cow, our friend in Gaza asked us if we thought the cow was really dead or if he was playing or doing yoga. Is that what he wanted us? At any rate, we have a good friend in Gaza whose name is Marwan Diab. Marwan is coming here while we're gone to present a paper on resilience. He's getting his PhD in psychology. Marwan told me at our last visit that in his 42 years he has never taken a drink from a fountain or a tap. Hasn't been safe for him to do that. But the Middle East Children's Alliance has been working very hard in the schools in Gaza. And there are either 14 or 18 schools now that have water that's safe to drink. And so we went to this school and saw these children drinking out of a tap, and I thought, oh my gosh, they're all gonna die. But no, the director of the school walked up to the tap and said, I'll show you. Mecca has made it safe for us to drink this water. So that was a really hopeful thing that we saw. But at the same time, it's such a tragedy that these little children have never had a drink out of a tap until this particular wonderful group of people, led in Gaza by a dermatologist named Dr. Mona, have been able to make this adjustment in the water system. Go ahead. So all these things I list for you: water, sewage, food, soil, electricity, the air, the buildings are unsafe, medical care is haphazard, education is at risk, and Bob will talk to you some about the schools. I've written a complex link down at the bottom of this that is a report from the United Nations Relief Works Association, which says, what will Gaza look like in 2020? They estimate that another 500,000 people will live there, that there will be no clean drinking water. Now it's 95 to 95% polluted. The situation in Gaza, if we don't do something, is destined for complete disaster. And we're very close now. Go ahead. Talk about medical care.
In the center is Rich Grady. I just went into the operating room, and this is, that parable about give a man a fish or teach him how to fish. And he's doing both simultaneously, helping these people do a better job operating. And the facilities are quite barely adequate, and lots of pieces of equipment are missing. I just mentioned that the gentleman that I spoke about earlier had just had a heart catheterization, which is a pretty simple, straightforward thing, a big fluoroscopy machine, and certain materials are available. But the a lot of politics. The catheterizations could have happened in 3 different hospitals. They've all been moved down to one hospital, which is sort of Hamas sanctioned. And our government does that to a certain extent. They try to limit the number of procedures done so that every hospital doesn't duplicate everything. But this is a little bit more political and a little bit more stringent. And in this particular hospital where this gentleman had his heart catheterization, the catheterization lab broke down. I went to go visit and I wanted to do some catheterizations with the patients, and no, they couldn't do it because there was this one piece missing, about a 8-inch long piece, and they had had it on back order for some time. It had come in from Scandinavia to fix the piece, and yet the Israelis kept it at Ben Gurion Airport and wouldn't let it come in because it might be something connected with a bomb or a rocket or something of that sort. And so they said, no, a lot of pleads back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So the clever people at the cath lab said, oh, we'll just take pictures. They took pictures of the broken piece and showed where it fitted into the machine, and then faxed all that to the Israelis, and the Israelis said, okay, it is really a cath piece for the catheterization. I mean, they let it through. But it's just pathognomonic of what's going on. Imagine, I don't know if any of you, take diabetes or anything, take insulin for diabetes or anything that needs refrigeration, but imagine what happens when your electricity is off for 8, 12, 24 hours at a time. Does that about cover what you were thinking about? Yeah.
So again, it's important to know that these people are well educated. They know what to do. They know what they want to do. They just lack the equipment. In all of Gaza, with 1.7 million people, there's one functioning MRI. One functioning MRI machine. I said to Bob, how many MRI machines are there at Evergreen Hospital? And he said, well, let me think. We're 2 or 3 in the hospital, 1 or 2 on the outside of the hospital. We think we came up with 5 for that little community hospital in Kirkland. That's crazy. Do you know? Sure, we need to use our medical care in a more efficient way. That goes without saying. But 1.7 million people and one machine, and war, and bullet wounds, and fractures, they are really limited in what they can do in safe medical practice. Go ahead. So this is our last slide. There is in Gaza this strong belief in the will of Allah, that Allah brings to them everything that happens, and in some ways they feel as though that's helping them to survive because they have an amazing amount of resilience. I'm not sure that I could have the amount of resilience that I see there every time I go. The amount of hopefulness, and the amount of anger, the amount of hopelessness, and the amount of hope. They just keep trying over and over again to rebuild their communities, to make their children feel safe in a place where there is no safety. They're working hard on women empowerment clinics to better educate the women and give them work to do, and they are working hard to educate their children to the point that they will triple shift their kids in the few schools that they have. And what they need is our help. Not to do for them, but to help them gain freedom, to help them gain respect in the world by telling their story, by not forgetting that they're there. It's so easy. Pillar of cloud happens. Everybody hears about Gaza on CNN. Anderson Cooper goes into CNN and flexes his muscles and looks cute in his t-shirt and comes out, and it's over. And it goes quiet again. And we don't think about it because we're on to news as entertainment one more time. But these people, every single day of their lives, live with this. So I'm so grateful to you for caring. I'm so thankful to you for being here. And we would love to take questions from you. Colin is going to pass a basket around in case you want to contribute to some of that equipment that we're going to take in this next time. All of the physicians and nurses who go into Gaza pay their own way entirely. and they take their vacation. I'm on vacation permanently, but they take vacation to go in and do this work, and I'm really grateful to them for the dedication that they show. This time we have 9 people going in through Eretz and 4 people coming in through Rafah. One of those people went in on a boat and she can't go in again through Rafah. But, you know, that's okay. We're going to band together once we get into Gaza and do our little bit of week of work and remind people that they're not forgotten. Thank you. I'm sorry, what? You can write, if you want to check, you can write it to Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, WPSR, and then it's tax deductible. Questions? Yes. Birth rate. Yeah. There aren't many people seeking to go into Gaza to live. No, I'm not being cynical or facetious about that. There are people who leave Gaza, have families, and go back in because it's home for them, because their tribe is there, and I say tribe in sort of the most loving way. That's what feels good to them and safe, and it's home, you know. And if we lose that here, we've lost that here. In our communities sometimes suffer from the lack of that, and they feel safe with one another. Rich, 4 things we could do. I always tell you to write to your congressman. I still believe it's important for you to do that. You know, Jim McDermott says to me, I get 1 letter from one person, and I go, well, there's a letter from, you know, he doesn't say in that case, but, you know, he might say that. If I get letters from 5 people, I begin to scratch my head and think, If I get letters from 10 people, I think, whoa, this is an issue. If I get letters from 100 people, I know I have to pay attention. So, you know, it still matters that you write letters. Find the people in Israel who are working for peace and support them. Write to Gisha, write to Physicians for Human Rights Israel, write to the ICAD, the Israeli Committee Against Housing Demolitions. You know, support those people. They've had a hard time in the last 5 years because they've been working through a less liberal government. But, you know, we all have that same issue, that we want peace. We want things to be better. And we know some of the things that we're up against about getting enough food for people and enough medical care for people and all of that. So we should not be strangers to some of those challenges. That's 2 things. You think of anything they can do? Anybody here have a suggestion? Okay. I'll keep thinking, Rich. Yes, to the United Nations. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, what? You can say you want your United Nations donation to go to help the people of Gaza. You can say that you want this to go to help fund care for the people of Gaza. UNRWA, Relief Works Association. The United Nations here in Seattle could help you with that, I think. Right, Carl? Well, it's at least one theory about what it's about. There's a large natural gas reservoir that has been reported off the coast of Gaza, and I usually talk about that. There was supposedly an agreement between Yasser Arafat and the Israeli government about what was going to happen with that natural gas reservoir. The people of Gaza, Hamas for sure, have been left out of all negotiations about that natural gas reservoir, but the reports are that it's pretty rich and could supply a huge amount of resource for that entire region. But you have to look hard for the information, and it varies. Every time I look at it, it changes. So sometimes the reports say the natural gas reservoir is very big, and sometimes it's not so significant, and sometimes the Egyptians are playing with it with Israel, and it's a bouncing balloon, but supposedly it's very significant. Well, there are goods coming in through the tunnels. Hamas is taxing them, as I mentioned to you. The Muslim Brotherhood, I think, has had various positions on that, and so I wouldn't even guess where they are on it right now, but goods do come in through the tunnels. In Operation A Pillar of Cloud, many of the tunnels were destroyed again, and so they're now rebuilding and trying to reopen some of those tunnels. The goods that come in are expensive. The gas that comes in is leaded. They burn that leaded gas in their generators and put the polluted fumes into the air, and so the rate of asthma is climbing in Gaza. But the goods themselves, you want to say something about the goods? Because I think the Muslim Brotherhood has been sort of in and out, but I can't tell you where they are right now.
Well, nor can I, but as we all know, it's a very complex situation because with this Arab Spring, there was great hope and lots of openings occurred and lots of help and movement back and forth. There's a lot of commonality of people and families in Egypt to southern Gaza, but then the Muslim Brotherhood came in and it was, and then the United States and Israel, well, what about this treaty? Do you want, I think we all know that Egypt is the second greatest recipient of foreign aid from the United States. And if you want to continue to have that, then you're going to have to do some things. And so there's an awful lot that's above ground, and pun intended, an awful lot underground that's happening that we're not party to. But it's super complex. Inside Gaza, there's a whole black market, and then there's this gray market, and there's some people who are filthy rich with this money and economy that's underground economy.
People within Gaza itself who are rich.
Yes. Well, okay, some people who find that there are some very lucrative and not so pleasant characters in that, and making things happen, and all in cahoots, much in cahoots with the Hamas. So there's a lot of forces going on that are very complex, and I don't know much more than that. But there's an awful lot of secrecy, and we just not are privy to that. Yeah.
Well, the whole area, the whole Levant, has suffered some from drought in recent years until about 2 years ago, and suddenly they had a lot of rain and the grasses were all green and people felt a little bit more hopeful about water. Gaza has a natural aquifer that, because of the population, has been overpumped and has been polluted with chloride. As Bob showed you, along the border, the Israelis have drilled wells that would naturally fill the aquifer in Gaza, but have been prevented from doing that. So they have two sources of lack. One is the lack of refilling from the Israeli side, and one is overpumping from the population side. Well, the third one then is drought. So the water is an issue. And as I mentioned, the nitrates in the soil have polluted the earth and the water, and the chlorides from using water that has salinized is a problem. And then Israel is putting in apparently 2 desalinization plants that will clean up the water so that it will be saline free or safe to drink, but that will be for Israel. And there are environmentalists who are fighting that because desalinization plants are not without negative effects on the environment. They kill a lot of fish. They get ground up and then put back into the ocean, so they pollute the ocean. There is no easy answer for a population that's too high to be sustained by a water source that's insufficient. Yes? Well, it's a good question, and we've taken Jim McDermott into Gaza with us, for instance, and he understands what's going on there, but he's not a strong voice in this present Congress. As you know, he's a courageous voice, but doesn't have a lot of compatriots in this Congress. So it's a good question, and it's a good reminder that we all need to do more about that. Thank you. Well, again, there are groups at work on that very thing, and I could, if you want to write to me, I can give you some links to that. There are a lot of people who are aware and working with Israelis and working with people in Gaza and working with people in the West Bank to try to raise awareness. But as I said, you know, you can raise awareness and it drifts away pretty quickly. The tragedy brings a headline, and when the acute tragedy is gone, the headline goes away, and we are a nation of short attention span, I'm afraid. Yes, Colin. It would depend on what kind of equipment they needed to take in with them, because there are definite prohibitions about what can go in. Bob mentioned to you the school situation. They approved, I think, the construction of 300 new schools. Is that right? And then we're given the building materials for 8. They need hundreds of new schools, and it's the problem of getting the building materials in, because all of those places of crossing except Kerem Shalom have been closed. So yes, other NGOs work in Gaza. Right now, the Israeli government has instituted a higher security policy of how you get into Gaza, and so you have to be a member of an international NGO to be able to gain access. And I'll tell you this on a personal basis, getting in this time has been a real chore. Probably 100 emails and 50 phone calls, and if Jim McDermott's office hadn't helped us, we wouldn't be getting in. But the people who made it possible for us to get in this time are the people in the Israeli consulate in San Francisco. So we have to form alliances with people who care, and we cannot demonize people, you know. We have to remember that we are all of the family, and the more we love each other, the better. So I'm going to take one more question.
What is your next trip, and how can I leave?
Okay, so we're leaving here on the 11th of April. We're only going to be gone 11 days this time, because Dr. Grady can only be gone for that short period of time. And if you want to contribute, we'll take in school supplies, we'll take in Tylenol and Advil, things that we don't need prescriptions for. We are collecting money to take in equipment to the Gaza Community Mental Health Program. They want a hard drive, they want a computer, they want to, you know, things like that that they can't easily gain, and we can take in for them. So donations to Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility are tax deductible, and we can take that. Okay, Todd? So if you have contacts, contact them, because certainly, and if you haven't read Miko Pellet's book, run out and buy it. Oh my gosh, it's so inspiring. This guy, who was born to a general of 1948, who became one of the greatest peace workers Israel will ever know, is absolutely a stomper for peace. So I agree with you. More high-profile people speaking with integrity, very important thing that we could do. We need to bring Ilan Pape back here. We need, and Richard Falk, and if you can think of someone, that's something I'd be happy to work on. So, all right, we have to stop for tonight. But thank you, and Rich, thank you for letting us come here tonight.